Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Pearl Daily here at the Audacity Network. Before we get started today, we have a couple announcements to go through. The first, guys, I want to be free from YouTube. I want to bring on the most controversial guests. I'd like to bring on, look into old cases that maybe have been dead for years that YouTube could potentially punish us for. In order to do that, we need to get 10,000 members on the website. This will cost $80 a year and $10 a month. This allows me to have zero outside funding and interview people that no one else will interview and be completely free from YouTube guidelines, at least on the website, not here. Now, this also allows us to fly in guests for the channel. And if we can get 10 signups a show, in a couple of months, we can bring on the most controversial person you guys can think of, all right? But we need to get 10 signups a show, so if you don't mind. The other thing you get out of that is I am able to read your chats during the show. So on YouTube, you would normally have to do a super chat in order to get it read. It's cheaper for $8 a month, and you get unlimited chats to read on the show. Okay. And last announcement, we are trying to get monetized on Spotify. So please go download your Spotify apps and look up Pearl Daily. We are on Spotify now, so please go do that. Okay, so today, and this may be a reoccurring thing where on Fridays I interview people as, a change of pace. So today I was on Twitter the last couple of months, and there was a guy that was in some of my replies, and he just had some of the most thought-provoking comments I'd seen, and he really seemed to understand what was going on. I end up looking at his profile, and it is Stephen Baskerville. He is a professor of politics at Collegium Intermedium University of Warsaw, and he's actually the author of a book, Who Lost America? And today I actually decided to bring him on the show and tell us more about why the United States went communist and what we can do about it. Welcome to the show. How are you?
All right, thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks for coming. So tell me, I saw you. How long have you been on Twitter for? Have you been on it for a while?
No, it's fairly new for me. Social media is um, a new acquired taste for me.
Yeah, I would see you in some of the replies, and I was thinking that the way that you wrote was very different, as opposed to a lot of the spurgs that tend to be on Twitter. I was like, wow, he's very thoughtful. And then I clicked on your profile, and I was like, wow, he's actually a whole author.
That's right. Yeah, I do try to write about things in depth. My field is politics,
Mhm.
and I try to look at the politics behind things. For example, the book you mentioned, the most recent book, is the culmination of several books I've written. The first one was on the politics of the divorce industry,
Mhm.
which I know you talk about a lot on your show, and it tries to look at not just the surface injustices and inanities of the divorce machinery, but to look behind it and explain the politics behind it and where it came from, the governmental machinery, the interest groups, and so forth.
Mhm.
So, that's my contribution to all this.
Yeah, so how did we get here? How did we get to a point where in America, the single motherhood rate is going up so high? We're essentially paid to leave our husbands. How did we get here? Where did it start?
There's a number of things. I place primacy on ideology. I think ideology has a lot to do with it. Feminist ideology has been around for a long time. It's been in the margins of our politics for couple hundred years
Mhm.
since the French Revolution, but it really emerged in in the post-war years, and it's really taken its place in the sun since the 70s, and it's really displaced all other forms of leftist ideology. I think it's displaced Marxism and liberalism and so forth, and it's really the dominant form of radical ideology today is sexual ideology, and I still think that the most powerful homosexualism, transgenderism are important, but I still think feminist ideology is the most potent, and today it's the cutting edge of the left.
Mhm. And
And
no,
yeah, go on.
no, go ahead, keep going.
Well, feminism has insinuated itself in our institutions in many ways that most people don't realize. The first political and governmental institution that was created after feminists got the vote in the early 20th century was the welfare state. And the welfare state from the beginning, was a matriarchy. From the beginning, it was infused with radical, especially feminist ideology. Jane Addams was among the founders of it, a Trotsky, anarchist and communist and feminist. And the welfare state was really, as I argue in the latest book, the first deep state. It was the original deep state because it was the way the government first insinuated itself into the private lives of law-abiding citizens. It was the first time that the government claimed the right to enter the lives of legally innocent people and take control of their homes and their families and their children. And this was what the feminists created very soon after getting the vote. Now, it took decades to work through to its logical conclusion, but this is what we are seeing today: is how the welfare state first took control of the lives of the poor, and then spread out from there through the family court system and the wealth and the divorce machinery to take control of middle class lives as well. And from the beginning, it's been intrusive, invasive, disrespectful of private life, and implicitly or explicitly hatred of men.
So when you say that family court evolved after the vote, I know I've seen some writings, I think from the 1800s, but I don't think divorce. From what I've read, divorce wasn't as prevalent then. Like, was the difference between then and now? Like, why is it so much more common? And what like changed in family court?
Right. Well, a number of things. It was people at the time were quite shocked about it. Even back in the 19th century, you had the
Yeah.
socialist Belford Bax, who writes about it as if it was as bad in Victorian times as it is now. But gradually, it expanded. It expanded largely by feminism. Feminism was not only not only created the welfare state in the early 20th century, but it also created the no-fault divorce system. People don't realize this. The feminists were drafting no-fault divorce laws back in the 1940s.
Mhm.
They couldn't get them implemented. They got them implemented in the 1960s and 70s when nobody was looking. The attention of the country was on Vietnam and civil rights and
Mhm.
Woodstock, and there was this very permissive atmosphere culture that was very tolerant of sexual experimentation and Woodstock hippies and all that. So they slipped it in under Ronald Reagan's nose. In many ways, the no-fault divorce system simply codified what was already being practiced in the family courts and in the welfare agencies for decades.
Mhm.
But this is what it does. The welfare system extended this throughout the family, the poor communities, especially the African American community. They instituted things like false accusations of child abuse, false accusations of domestic violence, and of course, child support enforcement. All of these were very anti-male. All of these were very unconstitutional in many ways. And they implemented these, they imposed these on poor families, especially poor Black men. And from the 1970s on, well, earlier, but really the
Yeah.
floodgates opened in the 1970s with the no-fault divorce laws, and the whole welfare machinery went from being imposed on poor Black men to being imposed on men and families generally, middle class as well. And so that's what's really done it, is the combination of radical feminism, the welfare state, and the huge increasing power of the judiciary throughout our society,
Mhm.
but especially starting with the family courts.
And how has the right allowed this to happen? Like right under their noses. You know what I mean? Like they've been because that was something baffling to me was I would hear conservatives talk about traditionalism and I would listen to the Daily Wire and Tradcons. But I once I started looking into like why men weren't getting married anymore, I it baffled me that they're not talking about this because this seems like for what they want, like the utopia that they want, it would seem like that's a pretty big piece, stop paying the women to leave. So how does that happen? Why don't they talk about this?
Well, it's a very good question. That's exactly the question I answer in my most recent book. Because when I wrote my first book, Taken into Custody on the divorce system, I was frustrated and baffled, and I thought I could appeal to the conservatives and they'd listen to me. And so
Yeah.
I wrote another book called The New Politics of Sex, in which I tried to show that it wasn't just divorce; it was the whole panoply of issues that had been taken over by the sexual radicals, especially the feminists. And still, I thought the conservatives, oh, sure, they'll listen to me now.
Mhm.
But, they just keep their lips tight. And so the third book, the most recent one, tries to explain the politics of the last 5 years, when basically, since the COVID crisis, I argue the left has basically staged a coup d'etat and
Mhm.
taken over the United States. And they did it they got their foot in the door through the divorce and the welfare machinery. I would say it's two things. One is that the left, as I say before, is innovative. The sexual ideology is a new form of political radicalism that the right doesn't understand.
Mhm.
It's not exact. They call it cultural Marxism, but it's not. It's not the same as Marxism. It's different. It builds on Marxism, but it departs from it in fundamental ways. So it's a combination of the left innovating in its ideological innovation by the left, and secondly, the right not understanding those innovations, not knowing how to oppose it, trying to shoehorn it all into categories they know, trying to refight the Cold War and refight the politics of the 60s and 70s, and basically denying that this is a new ideology that they don't know. And feminist ideology, sexual ideology is very innovative. It is disarming. I've written 3 books on it, and
Mhm.
I find it very difficult. I learn new things all the time. It's not easy to understand its implications. It insinuates itself into corners of our society and changes them fundamentally in ways that we are not obvious. And the conservatives don't understand this. They want to, as I say, shoehorn this into the categories they know. They call it cultural Marxism, and they want to refight the 60s politics. But it's innovative. And the other thing about sexual ideology, feminism, is it emasculates. It neuters its own opposition. It emasculates men. And if you look at the conservatives, the men who
Mhm.
run the organized conservative movement, the interest groups, the think tanks, the
Mhm.
Republican Party, all of these men, they're very diffident. They're very the late Phyllis Schlafly, who was a great crusader, who defeated the Equal Rights Amendment back in the 70s. And I worked with her a bit,
Mhm.
and she was one of the 10 most influential women of the 20th century or something.
Mhm.
But the words that always came out of her lips when she was talking about Republican men and conservative men, professionals, was cowards. She called them
Mhm.
cowards.
Yeah.
And she was right. She was right.
Well, even because sometimes I'm like, you guys go on whatever podcast. I don't understand how you see what's going on. I know whatever podcast is like, obviously they're going to be a little bit more theatrical. Though, do you know what that show is? Do you know whatever?
No,
Oh
so
no, sorry, I forget. So whatever is like a podcast where they bring on like college women to argue with basically and debate. I used to do a show similar like a year or two ago where you like bring on people off the street and like women off the street and debate them. And you can see like it, for example, in young women, the increase in like sex workers. Like that's something that's exploded in the last 5 years. Where if you asked me 10 years ago, I did not know a single sex worker. But when you move into the city, it's really not abnormal to meet OnlyFans models, to meet like that's not. And I still would have a hard time when I argue with conservatives getting them to acknowledge this is like a reality because it makes women look bad. Like I had a private investigator on the show and he said like
mhm.
attractive women, it's probably like 3 in 10 or 4 in 10 have done some sort of sex work. And like that's pretty unflattering, but whenever I bring up things like that, it's tough to even get conservatives to admit it if it makes women look bad.
The conservatives seem determined to make women out to be victims, and to absolve them from any kind of responsibility, to really to infantilize them,
Mhm.
women, and absolve them from any responsibility for their actions. This is one of the ways that, as long as you mentioned sex workers, this is one of the ways that feminism insinuates itself, wheedles its way into our society. I talk about this in my book, The New Politics of Sex.
Mhm.
The feminists push very hard for the legalization of prostitution, sex work, what they call that. But they also push very hard. They were also the ones that invented this narrative of human trafficking, right? So human trafficking is bad. Human trafficking is a crime, even though most human trafficking is simply consensual prostitution, by far, overwhelmingly. That's most of what it is. But human trafficking is criminal and bad, but sex work is okay, and that's good. And so basically, what it is they want to create a system in which only men are prosecuted for prostitution, right? In which the women are not prosecuted for selling sex, only the men are prosecuted for buying the sex. So it's one of these ways that the feminists have engineered injustices, flagrant injustices in the legal system, much like they've done with no fault divorce and with accusations of domestic violence and child abuse and so forth.
Yeah, that's what I noticed was I couldn't believe, how many women were lying of abuse. Because what happened was I was interviewing women in England, and when someone said they were abused by their ex-boyfriend, I just, when someone tells you a sad story, you sort of believe it, until someone in my chat one day told me to ask, like, 2 or 3 questions, like, ask them specifically what happened, and it would probably be every other show a woman said she was abused or raped, and if I asked them 3 questions, 85% of their stories would fall apart, or they wouldn't talk about how they hit them first, or they would sort of switch it. It wasn't abuse, it was emotional abuse. Why do we have such a widespread, problem of false accusations in this country? Like, how did we get here where, women have an awkward hookup, and sometimes I thought they really believed they were, like, assaulted at some points.
Right. Well, again, it's several things. I think one of them is the use of language. This term abuse, it's very ambiguous. Does abuse mean physical violence? Does it mean criminal violence, or does it simply mean, shouting or yelling or calling insults or whatever? And if you look at the domestic violence statutes, which are codified in the Justice Department, the U.S. Justice Department, the Home Office in Britain, they include things like insults and so-called psychological violence and economic violence and all these things which have no meaning. And this is one of the ways in which feminism has perverted the criminal justice system, because it's a cardinal principle of sound criminal law that the law has to be precise, the law has to
Mhm.
be exact. A jury or a judge has to know why they are being asked to put someone in behind bars. And if they're being told that there is abuse, what does that mean? And they started out with sexual harassment, and then sexual harassment became sexual abuse, and then sexual abuse became sexual misconduct, and sexual misconduct became sexual violence. And there's this, you don't know at what point you're really talking about physical assault.
Mhm.
So it's debased the language, debased the legal terminology, and therefore it's debased the legal system. Now, your question about where it came from, I think chronologically, I think again, much of this comes from the divorce system, because one of the main incentives for these false accusations does come from custody cases, child custody. If you look back in time, these false accusations or questionable accusations of child abuse was one of the earliest ones. I can cite you scholars going back to the 80s and even earlier who are sounding the alarm about false accusations of child abuse. And this didn't work too well, because they found that the child abuse, in many cases, the abuser of children turned out to be the mother, especially the single mothers,
Mhm.
overwhelmingly. So that shifted. They stopped using child abuse. They started using domestic violence, because that was a way of shifting the accusation from the family generally specifically to the father, the male. But child custody was the big concrete incentive, I think, that started this. And from there, you got to false accusations, of course, of rape, and of course, that's where the Me Too movement is, because they found it was so effective against fathers in custody cases that why not use it against Supreme Court nominees? Why not
Mm.
use it against Donald Trump?
Is that our side or his? Oh, okay. Well, guys, I'll read the chat while he reconnects, because I think you guys can still see me, right? We'll bring him back. I think he got caught. Okay, so remember, guys, if you want your chat read for sure, you go to the network page, theaudacitynetwork.com. The link's in the description. You get the monthly or yearly plan, and then you get your comments read the whole year. What a time to be. Can you believe it? Amazing. All right, so Yakov says it's not enough to know something. A means to reverse the problem must be identified to make the change. So what must happen? Okay, where did he go? It's okay. It's all right. It happens sometimes. Let me look at the chat and see if you guys have any questions for him. Let me know. Oh, you're back.
I'm
Hello.
back.
Okay.
I don't know how much you heard of what I was saying, but I was just pointing out that your question about where did these accusations come from? I think they began very much in family court, and they spread out from there into the political sphere.
Mhm.
If you can get custody from fathers, you can. Why not disable? Why not neuter Donald Trump and your political opponents? And I think that's where this is. This is why my argument of my latest book is that the legal poison that has come out, that the family courts have spread, is now poisoning our entire judicial and political system, as I predicted it would in my earlier books.
Would you say that the police back up false accusations? Like, would you say a large percentage of men in jail for like rape and abuse are in? Because I know family court is different than criminal court. So I'm curious if you think it affected criminal court as well.
Oh, I think it has. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I cite books in this book, in my previous politics. I cite studies, Paul Craig Roberts, who investigated the criminal courts, and they, if you look at I hope you can hear me. I'm told my internet connection is unstable. They've looked into these criminal courts, especially when it comes to low-income minority defendants accused of crime and rape, of murder and rape. That the injustice. So it's no, there's courts as well at the low-income levels.
Okay, because essentially, if they don't have money for a lawyer, then like they're kind of screwed. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's part of it. Yeah, there's the the public defenders are just overwhelmed. They can't
Yeah.
properly defend their clients. And if you look at I mean, you can see videos of the way these courts operate. There's assembly line justice. Not necessarily in murder trials or rape trials, but if you look at things like again the family court, things like domestic violence or child support cases, you've got queues of men lining up. Each case takes about a minute or two. It's people call it assembly line justice, and that's basically what it is. I mean, there's no weighing of evidence. There's no due process of law. They just queue up and wait for the judge to read out a formulaic sentence, or basically a robotic judge listening to a robotic prosecutor, issuing boilerplate sentences, one after the next. And that's what our justice system has become. And family courts had a big role in that. Big role.
And do you foresee any change with the new administration? I think people are very hopeful now that Trump is taking office. But for me, I'll just tell you my opinion. I have a hard time believing it'll change just because there's so much money involved. Like there divorce lawyers, there's politicians involved. Like abolishing something like Title 4D. I think that's gonna be tough, but I'm curious if you have a different opinion with the new administration coming in.
Yeah, well, very good question. I think if we had a Kamala Harris administration, it would get worse. And
Yeah.
being herself a prosecutor, I think she personifies the abuses and the injustices that I just described a moment ago.
Mhm.
And this is a trend throughout the English speaking world. If you look at not just left wingers like Kamala Harris, but right wingers like Josh Hawley in the Senate, who wrote this book about, scolding men for not getting married. His career path was almost exactly the same, going from prosecutor to attorney general to, what is it, governor or senator or whatever. The idea that prosecutors should be the career path for politicians is very disturbing. You can see it's spreading to the UK now. Keir Starmer, the new prime minister in Britain, is a prosecutor, uh, by career prosecutor, very much similar to Kamala Harris. So that would have been, I think, worse. But as far as the Trump administration, I I'm not real hopeful by the new appointments. I'm a little disappointed by them. I haven't seen any indication that he wants to take on justice reform generally, in general, let alone family court or family law justice in particular. Even though he himself was, of course, Trump and his associates have been victims of these lawfare operations, which again very much began in family courts. I'm a little disturbed, for example. I'm disturbed by someone like Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard. A lot of people, MAGA Republicans, Trump Republicans, really admire her. And I can understand why in some ways, but I was very disappointed in some of the statements she made about the lawfare operations.
Mhm.
I know she's an attorney herself, and I thought her statements were designed more to cover up more than they revealed. For example, one of the cliches that you used to hear during the lawfare operations, when they were going after Trump for, this and trivial offenses and trying to get him out of the race
Mhm.
by prosecuting him. Tulsi Gabbard and others would say, well, if they can do this to Donald Trump, then after that they'll be able to do it to ordinary Americans.
Mhm.
Okay, that was the narrative. So we shouldn't allow this. If they can do it to Donald Trump, they can do it to any of us. No, no, that sounds good. It's a good principle, but it's not. We're way past that.
Mhm.
The point of the lesson to be drawn from the lawfare operations, they did it to Donald Trump and his associates because they were already doing it to ordinary Americans. In other words, they've been practicing on defenseless Americans in private, again, secret courts, family courts, and
Mhm.
others, probate courts, you name it. They've been practicing these lawfare, these highly unjust legal proceedings against ordinary American citizens. They've been practicing it for decades. They've honed the tools, the weapons, so that down to a fine art. And so now they're able to use them not only against the divorced dad and the low income black father and the
Mm.
from the south side of Chicago. Now they can use it against the big fish, like politicians like Donald Trump. So I was disappointed that Tulsi Gabbard. Um, I thought she was, not concerned with exposing or bringing to light the legal abuses, but instead she was concerned with covering them up. And I think many people, even very well-informed commentators, um, fail to understand just how crooked and corrupt the American judiciary is. I think of all of our institutional structural problems in the United States, I think the most serious sector of corruption is the judiciary. I think it's more important than the deep state, the bureaucrats and the functionaries and so forth. It's the judiciary is really the place where injustice is systematically doled out
Mhm.
to American citizens and increasingly to opposition political figures.
And what do you mean by I because family court is separate from criminal court, right? Do I understand that correctly?
Right.
So
Yes.
when you say the judiciary, are you referring just to family court, or like what are you referring to?
I'm referring to the whole thing, the entire American court system,
Mhm.
state, local, state, and federal, of which the family courts are a part, criminal courts are a part, the federal courts are a part. But I believe that the poison, the corruption, I think, is largely coming from the bottom, from the not from the head, but from the tail, because these courts are secret. They violate every principle of the common law. In my earlier book, Taken into Custody, I go down the Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution generally, and I show that virtually every article of the Bill of Rights is routinely, systematically violated by the family courts, as well as other protections in the Constitution. So these courts are thoroughly corrupt. They have no reference whatsoever. They violate basic principles like secret justice. Again, it's an old principle of the common law that justice has to be open. It has to be public. Justice must be seen to be done. In other words, we must all be able to look at the courts and see that they are administering justice justly. And if courts that operate in secret, it's a formula for systematic injustice.
It's the gag
And
orders, right? Gag orders?
abs,
Yeah,
there you go. There you go.
because that's what I was when I tried to interview, there was some pretty high profile people I got interested in the divorce documentary we're doing, but the challenge was a lot of them were under gag orders and just didn't want to once a guy's divorce is settled and they're done, they don't really want to they just want to move on with their life. And so, there was some pretty high profile people I couldn't get, even though they would have been open to it, like I couldn't get interviews with them because of, is it just gag orders or are there other things too?
Well, that's bad enough, but yeah, there's just
Yeah.
general secrecy. But the gag orders are highly dishonest. I mean, they claim that the gag orders and the secrecy of the family courts is to protect family privacy, but this is nonsense. This is completely dishonest. It's not to protect family privacy. It's to provide a cloak for the courts to invade family privacy with impunity, right? They can invade family privacy, and none of the rest of us know about it because of the gag orders. And this too was very disappointing in Donald Trump because he too was the object of a gag order. He was not allowed to defend himself, to proclaim his innocence when these clearly bogus charges were leveled against him because of this gag order. Well, why didn't he use that opportunity to question the whole concept of gag orders? What right does any court to have to issue gag orders to silence American citizens, to violate their First Amendment protections, and to operate operate in secrecy? This is except in the most extraordinary circumstances, and yet these have become routine. These courts are, there are other ways in which they are secret. Um, the press is regularly excluded from family courts. Even other family members can be excluded from family courts simply on the say-so of a judge. So, this concept of secret courts, gag orders, this is, you know, this is something that people like Donald Trump and Tulsi Gabbard and the new Attorney General, they should be, shouting from the rooftops on this. And they're just completely silent. I suspect because most of them are members of the bar associations, and the bar associations would have their scalp if they start blowing the whistle.
Um, can you talk more about how family court violates the Bill of Rights?
Well, start with the First Amendment. Again, the gag orders. I've covered that. Violation of religion. They give orders to parents that they cannot practice their religion with their own children. They cannot take their children to court.
Mhm.
That's one of them. The Fourth Amendment is flagrantly violated. The Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches and seizures. I mean, the first thing they do is seize your children. First thing they do when
Yeah.
a divorce is filed, what's the first thing they do is they seize control of your children and throw the father out of the home. I mean, that's the very first thing they do in a divorce proceeding is they remove the father, and that's very revealing. They say it's temporary. Oh, we're just doing it temporarily, but it's never temporary. It's permanent.
Mm.
Once the father is removed from the home, once he's thrown out of his house, once he's separated from his children, once his bank account is taken away, the burden of proof is on him to get it back again. There's no burden of proof on the court for why they take away his children, why they take away his, throw him out of his home, why they take away his, raid his bank account. Uh, he has to prove why they should be given back again. So the fourth, and they ask him intrusive questions about his relationship with his children. He's interrogated behind closed doors. His children can be interrogated about their relationship, their home life, and their relationship with their father and mother. What is this if it isn't an unreasonable search and seizure of interrogating family members about the legally innocent family members about the privacy of their private lives? So the for due process of law is completely disregarded by the family courts. I mean, there's a presumption of guilt. Everyone who's been in family court knows that. The very concept that legally innocent people can be hauled into court and have their lives controlled by a court when they haven't committed any legal offense and they're not suspected of committing any illegal offense, this violates a very old principle of the common law. That principle people. And yet the divorce, if that principle were enforced, the divorce courts would be out of business because the first thing they do is assume control over the private lives of legally unimpeachable citizens. Citizens are suspected, convicted, and even suspected of no legal wrongdoing, either criminal or civil.
And how did they deal with this before we had this entire system, before family court? What happened to the children?
Well, at one time there was a presumption of father custody. The presumption was that fathers would have, the children were the property, if you like, of the father. And the fathers were, if there was a divorce, the father would get custody. That was the assumption, and that fathers, a married father, not unwed fathers, not sperm donors, but legally married fathers, were presumed to be the father of the child and were presumed to have custody. Now, I'm not saying that was entirely just. I mean, if the father, I suppose, was unfaithful or broke the marriage contract, then maybe he shouldn't necessarily get custody. But the presumption was that the father would have custody. Now that, when exactly that was eroded, how I think it was a gradual process that took place over the course of the late 19th century and throughout the 20th century, culminating in its codification with no-fault divorce. But John Stuart Mill, the political philosopher, was writing in his essay of 1850, I believe, that they are in law his children. And the law, the divorce rate was extremely low. So it's something that happened gradually over the course. It was about that time, of course, that the radical feminist movement began to be militant, and divorce was one of the first planks in their platform from the very beginning. The Seneca Falls Declaration back in 1848, and the English divorce, English feminist movement, the Pankhursts and so forth, all of them, they've stuck. Divorce was part of the agenda from the very beginning. Today, if you look in the global South, the feminists in the United Nations, the feminists are pushing divorce on the global South the same way they pushed it on the West. And you hear nothing about this. We hear a lot about abortion. We hear a lot about equal pay for. We hear a lot about the other aspects, but we hear almost nothing about divorce. And yet, I believe, and I believe this thoroughly, and I'm not the only one, that the essential cornerstone of the feminist platform, the feminist agenda, is divorce.
Mm-hmm.
They won that battle before they even started. The rest of feminism since 1969, the decades, what is it, half century now, has been just a mopping up operation. They've just been consolidating power because they won the battle in 1969 when they passed the first no-fault divorce law in California. And that's the essence of feminist power is control over the reproductive system.
Yeah, and birth control. I mean, we're in 100% in control of who's born. Men have no
I
say.
think
Yeah.
That had a big role in it. Yeah, my Catholic friends point this out, and they're right. Of course, that's not a legal innovation necessarily, although legalizing it was. But you're right. It's control, and this is what I believe why abortion is so important to the left, way out of proportion to what one would have thought is its importance. But it's control over the reproductive system, and as long as feminists control the reproductive system, it's the old like the old poem says, "The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world."
Yeah, it's crazy. I was trying to do a video. The video broke. So I didn't end up doing it, but I went to this feminist event in a women shouldn't vote shirt. It's pretty funny. They were like spurging. And the one of the issues that they talked about was women can't get abortions in certain countries still. And one of their solutions was to mail them the abortion pills to those countries. And it was so crazy to me that they want abortion so bad that they're willing to go to cultures that are different from theirs and almost like force it into their culture. And I was just thinking, you guys are like college, white women in England. What are you like? Why do you guys care so much about, women aborting their kids in other countries?
Mm. No, it is. I know it is. It is irrational. It seems irrational to us, but I think that's the way to explain it. Is that larger process of controlling the reproductive system generally, which they really, really began, and really, I think they won most of that battle
Mhm.
when they codified the no-fault divorce laws in the 70s. And it swept through the legislatures, the state legislatures in America, the parliaments of Europe, Western Europe. They didn't know what they were passing. They didn't understand. Ronald Reagan didn't understand it. The legislatures didn't understand it. They were told it was, divorce by mutual consent. Um, all these stories about, phony narratives about, inventing affairs and so forth. But it was a sleight of hand from the beginning. I mean, the feminists had drafted these laws. If you look on the website of the National Association of Women Lawyers, they brag about this. They were drafting these laws back in the 1940s, and they were just waiting for an opportunity to slip them through when nobody was looking. And that's what they did in the 70s.
The National Association of Women Lawyers. It says this on
Yeah.
their website.
It's on their website. Yeah, I could cite you somewhere. I've got the citation. I owe that to a historian named Judy Perico, by the way. She discovered that.
Wow. You have a couple questions. So, guys, if you go to the Audacity Network, if you have any questions for him, you can submit them on the website. So, Brian Dew wants to know, is there anything ordinary people can do to push back on the current corrupt family court system?
Um, well, there's various reforms that you can do. I outline those in my earlier book, Taken into Custody. But I don't like to just issue wish lists that'll never get passed. In other words, I have all the things that I think would be perfect, and if you just implemented everything I like, um, then everything would be okay. So in my latest book, I have a new approach to how to solve this problem, and that is to harness the power of the marriage strike. I'm sure you're aware of this, how men are, well, I've seen on your show, that men are refusing to marry when they find out what's going on in family court. They're simply not marrying because it's just not worth it. There's a good book on this. Helen Smith wrote a book on this about 10 years ago called Men on Strike. And she outlines it had been going on for at least a decade before that. So it's been going on for a good 20 or 30 years of men refusing to marry because they know what's going on, because they know the injustices, what can happen to them, how they can be destroyed by the family court. Well, I my argument is that this provides enormous leverage. Like any strike, it shouldn't be an end in itself. It shouldn't be just indefinite. I mean, most men want to marry. They want to have children. Most people want to have family lives. So I don't approve of marriage as a marriage strike, marriage boycott, as a lifestyle choice for its own sake indefinitely. But I think it provides enormous leverage for men and for women to start demanding reform of the laws. And if you look at the women too are, they're complaining that men won't marry them, men aren't getting married, men don't love them, um, because of the divorce laws. So I think we need to say to the women and to the men, look, the reason you can't get married is because of these ridiculous laws. All you have to do is change the laws. And I know that politicians are stubborn. They shut up about it. They won't deal with it. They're feckless. They're cowardly. But if you mobilize, and if you get the women mobilized too, I think that this marriage strike furnishes enormous leverage to say to the politicians, to the churches especially, another useless, feckless sector of society that complains about that men won't marry but won't do anything about it. If you want men to marry, just change the laws, change the divorce laws, get rid of these family courts with their injustices, and restore, a just system of equitable divorce, and men will marry again, and you can have children, uh, but you can't have it both ways.
How should men conduct themselves on a daily basis given all this? Is a question from Tony.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wrote a book a few years ago, recently, not too long ago, about a gentleman's guide. It's an old genre of books about manuals, guidebooks for how to be a gentleman. These go back to the Renaissance. They've been around even the Middle Ages. And I wrote one, so I began to think about that kind of thing. Uh, how should men do this? Um, I think there's a lot of talk about men needing to be more manly, more, self-reliant, more. And I agree with that. I think that we've all been feminized. I see it in myself. We've all been neutered in some ways by feminism, by political correctness. Men need to be, I think men to be not be afraid of women. There's no reason for them to be afraid of women. They have nothing to lose nowadays, especially if they're not going to marry them anyway. So I like to see maybe more of maybe the tough guy image I prefer is not so much John Wayne and Clint Eastwood so much as Humphrey Bogart, who refused to take nonsense from women in some of his movies like Lauren Bacall. Um, I think there has to be a code of conduct among men to be um, to adopt codes of manliness, codes of gentlemanly behavior, but that doesn't mean well, I'm sure your listeners know what gynocentrism is, and it doesn't mean pandering to women, and it doesn't mean cheap, false chivalry. Um, how to strike that balance is very difficult to say. But I do talk about that in my book. It's called A Gentleman's Guide to Sex, to Manners, Sex, and Ruling the World.
Another one was if you had to picture society in 100 years. Oh, that's a good question. If you had to picture society in 100 years from now, what do you see happening to relationships between man and women?
Well, the current situation is unsustainable. You cannot have no society, I think, that I know of has ever existed without marriage. I mean, this idea that you can have cohabitation, you can have um, both men and women refusing to marry, refusing to have children. It's not sustainable. Either our civilization will decline, will be overrun by stronger civilizations like the Muslims, who still value marriage to the extent that even they do. But I mean, we're seeing the decline of the West already, and so either we clean this up, either we take control of this, or it's lights out for the Western world. Let me just add though one thing that I may have kind of glossed over here. Men have also the other thing I criticize men for, especially some men's rights activists, and some MGTOW,
Mhm.
some men's marriage strikers, is this idea of renouncing marriage altogether, and this idea that marriage is obsolete. Marriage, I don't think that's true. I don't think it can be true. I've never seen. There's never been a civilization without it. I don't think a civilization can exist without it. But even more than that, is that marriage exists. Marriage and fatherhood are inseparable. Marriage, people talk about this a lot. What is the purpose of marriage? Why does marriage exist? And conservatives a few years ago, the traditional conservatives were always up, as you know, they were always preaching about what a wonderful thing marriage was. And their main opponents in that was same-sex marriage and the homosexuals and so forth. And they were, singing the praises of what a wonderful thing in marriage. But so they said marriage is for reproduction, marriage is for having children, for strong families. But they never quite got it right. As usual, the trad comms were more romantic than they were accurate. The purpose of marriage is fatherhood. The purpose of marriage is fatherhood. And that's why fathers, more than anyone, have a stake in the perpetuation and the enforcement of the marriage contract. They have to do this. They cannot renounce marriage. They cannot live in cohabitation or without women, without children, without families. It is up to the men to champion and enforce the marriage contract. And if you look at this, this is why the marriage contract exists. After all, the bond between a mother and her children is biological.
Mhm.
Everyone knows who the mother of a child is. You can't avoid it, right? So the biological link is clear. The bond between a father and his children is not biological. It is the important bond, at least, is social and it's socially constructed by marriage. Not by sperm tests, but by marriage. In the English common law, under what was known as Lord Mansfield's rule, the father of a child was the man who's married to the mother, not the sperm donor, not the biological contributor, but the man married to the mother. And this was the purpose of this, was to preserve marriages against the wife's infidelity, adultery. The father had a choice, the man had a choice. If his wife was pregnant and he knew it wasn't his, he could either divorce her or he could accept the child as his own, and the child would be presumed to be his own under the law. And the sperm donor, the interloper, would have no rights whatsoever to the child. And this was, and what this showed was the inseparability of marriage and fatherhood. And it was the same in the Napoleonic Code. It's the same in other legal systems as well. So it's the purpose. The bottom line, the purpose of marriage is fatherhood. And if you look back a few years to the last couple of presidential administrations, the Bush administration started all these it was the Clintons started this. The Clinton administration, who first perceived this fatherhood crisis, they started these programs to so-called restore fatherhood. And they were going to restore fatherhood and, get fathers in touch with their children. And they never said how they were going to restore fatherhood, but they were going to restore fatherhood. And they never did anything. It turns out really all that restoring fatherhood meant was some psychotherapy, mostly feminist psychotherapy, coupled with increased child support enforcement. So the Clinton administration was completely disingenuous. Their programs completely failed. It didn't do anything about the fatherlessness crisis. Then the Bush administration came along, and they basically took the same programs and they relabeled them as marriage promotion. We're going to promote marriage. It was exactly the same programs. They didn't change a thing, and the content was the same. It was feminist psychotherapy coupled with increased child support enforcement. So it didn't do anything to restore marriage, to increase the marriage rate, to restore families, and both of the programs were abysmal failures. But the point is that they both could interchangeably talk about marriage and fatherhood. That's the grain of truth in this, is that they are inseparable. And that's why fathers have to be the champions of, and I think the men's rights activists and red pillars and all this, I don't think they can run away from this. I don't think they can accept
I think
a society of cohabitation and lack of families.
so. I think what they would say though is they wouldn't see a difference between a girlfriend and a wife in 2024. And I think like a collective experience of them is that once the woman knows that you can't leave, that they just start getting fat. They start, being very quarrelsome. And like I know one guy, he went to my gym in London. He waited 10 years to marry his girlfriend. She divorced him within a year after they got married. It's like the same guy. You know what I mean? And I think that's like I think that's why they say that is because once women get the leverage, they're just not too good with it.
Well, they're correct about that. I mean,
Yeah.
they're right. That the marriage contract does not afford fathers any rights.
Yeah.
The fathers don't have the man doesn't have any rights if he's married, and he doesn't have any rights if he's unmarried.
Mhm.
But my point is that I think the only way to rectify that is for the father that it should be that way. Marriage should confer parental rights. If you really want to restore marriage, if you really want to, if the tradcoms really want to uh, reinforce marriage against the homosexuals and against others, the way to do it is to enforce the marriage contract, so that a man knows if he marries and plays by the rules, he will have absolute, inviolable rights to his children. In other words, you can, if he marries
Okay.
and has a family, you cannot take away his children. You cannot interfere with his relationship with his children. As long as he keeps his nose clean, he doesn't, he's not unfaithful, he doesn't desert, he doesn't, as long certain grounds for marriage, certain grounds for
Mhm.
divorce, as long as he doesn't transgress those grounds and he knows it, then his rights to his children are ironclad and inviolable. And once that's the case, then marriage will be restored. Men will marry.
Mhm.
We'll have the birth rate will go up. I mean, it's not rocket science. It can be done, but I don't see any alternative. I don't think prenuptial agreements can substitute for that because they're not enforceable in court when it comes to child custody. I don't think. I'm pretty sure about that.
Mhm.
And it shouldn't have to be prenuptial agreements. It should be ironclad rules in the law. Now, the grounds can vary according to jurisdiction.
Mhm.
They might, vary a little bit here and there. But the basic is, you know what the rules are. You marry you play by the rules. You don't transgress them, and you have the rights. Your rights to your children are inviolable, are guaranteed by the courts.
Well, so
And the courts,
what would happen in
yeah.
that situation if the because I just know how they're gonna hear this, right? And I'm thinking they would not wanna be with a woman that doesn't wanna be there. And so if because I don't know, when a woman doesn't wanna be there, sometimes she can make a man's life a living hell. And so what would happen in situations like that where the woman is hell bent on leaving? Would she give up the right to her children or how would that work? Okay, that's how it
Yeah,
would work.
she would leave. She would leave with the clothes on her back, and this, I suppose, the same with a man. If
Mhm.
if she doesn't have grounds, if there's no legal transgression on the man's part, then the courts have no right to interfere with his children.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, you see, and you don't need a law
Okay.
for this. You simply need to enforce the basic principles of the common law. That if a citizen, any citizen, is legally innocent of any legal transgression, then you don't have a right to interfere with his private life. So, as long as you had the children within wedlock, as long as you obey the laws of marriage in your jurisdiction, the courts can't interfere. If she wants to leave, she, she knows where the door is.
Mhm.
I suspect that most women would not leave. I suspect they would make accommodation the way our grandmothers and great grandmothers did
Mhm.
in these circumstances when when divorce was difficult. You learned to live together. You made accommodations. You made compromises.
Mhm.
And I think the amount of love and devotion and loyalty was much greater in those days. I'm not one of these nostalgics for the good old days, but I think in that respect, you make if you can't leave, you learn to get along.
Mhm. Um, Yaakov has another comment. It says, "Is not what he is saying fully contradictive? You cannot beat the current system. It must be undone before marriage can be viewed as anything reasonable." Do you think that's true?
Well, I think a lot of this has to be dismantled. I mean, a lot of this
Yeah.
is negative. The problem is mostly negative. I mean, there's no reason for family courts to exist. Okay,
Mhm.
specialized courts of any kind are a prescription for disaster and for injustice. They're a formula for injustice. The great English jurist A.V. Dicey said that the rule of law is is only achieved in the ordinary courts of the land. the ordinary laws and the ordinary courts. Whenever you create special courts, specialized courts to deal with a special problem, you can be pretty sure the courts are going to destroy what it is they're supposed to be administering. There's no need for family courts. People who break law, marriage has to be a legal contract. If you break the legal contract, there are civil courts for dealing with the party that breaks the contract. And these courts are just completely lawless, and they need to be put out of business. I don't see any justification for specialized family courts.
Um,
And I would add about the welfare agencies too. Much of this chicanery and much of the evil machinery of this began with, we inflicted it first on the poor, and then it spread to the middle class. So I think, the welfare state also needs to be, I don't think there's any justification. The welfare state doesn't solve poverty; it perpetuates poverty.
just quick, are you tapping the microphone or something? I hear
Sorry.
yeah, I don't. It's okay. I was just making sure it was your end and not mine. I wanted to read one of your tweets to you, and I was hoping you could explain it a little bit further. You said, I had a list of reasons why women joined churches, and one of them was that they like the flower dresses and the trends. Two was I think the concerts. I can't remember exactly what I said, but you said churches are catering more to women's preferences, creating a dynamic where men's roles in the family and society is often trivialized as ornamental. True spiritual leadership is not about empowering current and future fathers, not women.
Well, yeah, I think that's very true. The churches have become matriarchies. The pastors and priests have become, wimps, simps. The power in many churches is the wife of the clergy. And the evidence for that is very plain. The evidence for that is their failure, their complete fecklessness when it comes to standing up for divorce and for the wronged party in a marital breakup or in a family crisis of any kind. And I think this has contributed more than anything to the decline of the churches, the decline of Christianity, the empty pews, is the failure of the churches to deal with it. How many of us, how many people in the Western world only go to church on important family occasions, the most important of which is when you get married, right? Or when your children are baptized. This is what churches look to. So you go to church, you have a nice marriage ceremony, lots of flowers and bridesmaids and grooms and everything. Everybody has a wonderful time, and everybody feels good. And then a couple of years later, there's a divorce, and so the wronged party, the innocent party, typically the father, goes to the priest and says, you consecrated this marriage. What do I do now? And the priest or pastor typically comes back and says, I'll pray for you. Sure, I'll pray for you. And maybe I'll help you find a lawyer too. No. This is not right. Okay, a church that's serious about the family, a church that's serious about Christian values, what would a church in those circumstances do? First thing they would do is they would demand the two parties come into the church, and the church would sort it out. And they would knock their heads together and force them to behave. Mm-hmm. The second thing the church would do is they would demand standing in the legal case, and they would go into that courtroom and say, look, we consecrated this marriage. I, the priest or pastor, married this couple under the rules of our church. Our congregation witnessed this, and you, the judge, have no right to break it up. Okay? This is what a really brave churchman would do. And this is what brave churchmen have done over the centuries. If you look at some of the greatest episodes of Western history, is when brave churchmen stand up to the civil magistrates, the civil authorities, point the bony finger at them and say, you are encroaching on God's turf. John Fisher, Cardinal Mindszenty, Richard Wurmbrand, the great martyrs of the Western churches. And I'm talking about Orthodox and Catholic and Protestant. They are John Fisher, Thomas More, you name it. They stand up to the civil authorities and say, you have no right to do this. You're violating God's law. This is what the pastors and priests of the Western world should be doing in divorce cases. They should go into the courtrooms and they should demand standing to be heard. And they should say, we consecrated this covenant. You, the civil authorities, have no right to tear it up. And that's not a legal argument, but it is a moral argument, and it is one that I think gives them. Well, I think it is one that gives them legal standing to be heard in a case in a courtroom
Hmm.
over this, and that's what they would be doing. But they don't do this because they're
Got it.
feminized.
And if she leaves, basically, then she gives up the rights to her children. Like that's the
If she leaves without grounds, if
yeah,
she
like
doesn't have legal grounds,
because she's breaking the legal contract.
she's breaking the
Got
path
it.
of least. I mean, I shouldn't say that. The least intrusive measure for the civil authority, for the state, for the
Mhm.
government, is to simply leave the children with the spouse that remains faithful to the marriage contract.
Yeah.
If one spouse is faithful to the marriage contract and the other spouse is breaking it, either by infidelity or by desertion
Mhm.
or by leaving, then the minimal state intervention into that household is to simply leave the children in the household with the spouse that remains. And if the other spouse wishes to leave, then they know where the door is.
Got it.
What
So,
could be simpler?
but what would happen with all of the because what I'm thinking of is I find that church women have a tendency to accuse the men of abuse even more. Because for them it's their reputation. Where liberal, I actually find like I found worse divorces amongst more religious women, and my reasoning was because the religious women, it matters more to their reputation, so they have to have been abused. Where the liberal woman, it
Mhm.
won't hurt her standing as much because, I mean, it's not really something her social circles care about. This is just the people I've interviewed. I'm not saying it's like a huge sample size, just what I found. So if then the woman comes back and says, I was abused, how do the courts take that then? Like how do they, because then don't they have to investigate into personal matters? Like how would they deal with that issue?
Right. Well, you're correct that there would certainly, if my prescription were followed, you're correct that there would certainly be an increase in the allegations of domestic abuse. So there's no doubt about that, because it would be the only weapon left. But I don't think we can avoid that. I think we have to grasp the nettle. We have to bite the bullet on that. False accusations are a criminal offense. You make false
Yeah.
accusations of a
Okay.
crime against someone, and it's that in itself is a crime, and it has to be punished. And our failure to punish that is exactly why these accusations are out of control now. Not just domestic abuse, but all the others that the Me Too movement is pushing. Now, at some point, you have to decide what crosses the line in domestic abuse. I mean, is it a physical crime? Arguably, that a man that truly, really does beat his wife physically with physical violence has given grounds for divorce. I mean, that's a an old principle. If you just, a few insults or whatever meaningless things like psychological abuse or
Mhm.
economic abuse, not giving her money, um, these sorts of things. This is different, but again, the law has to be precise, and you're talking there about criminal law. You're talking there about someone who, if he's beating his wife, he belongs in jail,
Yeah.
not just divorce. You either put him in jail. In fact, I knew a man
Oh,
once who did that. He was accused of abuse in a domestic case, and he said, he demanded of the judge. He said, I want to be formally charged with physical assault, and I want to be tried for it with a jury of my peers. Either that, or I want the charges withdrawn. I don't know if it succeeded or not, but I mean that's a good, interesting
right.
strategy to, you know.
No, that makes sense. So that's how you would combat it is you would need he would be it's either he's in jail or he's not, essentially.
Yeah,
So
or
if
some
he's
some some proper criminal punishment. Yeah,
yeah. No, that makes
yeah, but this
sense.
this this vagueness of is absurd. Where you haven't actually where the obvious purpose of these allegations is to get the man out of the house, pardon me, and to establish a fait accompli, to get him out. But he's never charged with a crime. He just spends a weekend in jail, and then he has to go to classes where he's indoctrinated into feminist ideology, and he loses his children, and he loses his home and his bank account and all that. I mean, this is obviously
Yeah.
legal fiasco.
And then people that aren't religious could just not enter the contract. So if you're not religious and you don't wanna do the marriage route, then you just don't enter that contract.
Right. It would still be a legally enforceable contract for people who are not religious. But think about the advantage of getting married in a church. If
Mhm.
you got married in a church, and if the churches did their job like they're supposed to do, then when your spouse, wife divorces you and tries to take the children, you've got a whole congregation of people to go into that courtroom
Mhm.
and fight for you and publicize it and shame the woman, like churches are supposed to do, the old punishment of excommunication. And it can be reversed if the man is the wrongdoer. But my point is that churches would mean something. Their doctrine it wouldn't be just some abstract doctrine that sounds good on Sundays. Churches would have a real role in our private lives and in our public life, and
Mhm.
people would. I think the pews would fill back up. I think people would start to see that a church is an important institution, and I believe it is. I believe
Mhm.
that viable, if I may say so, masculine, manly churches, virile churches, are an important institution, and we've paid a dear price for losing them.
Yeah, I'm just
But
wondering how that would go because, like, I think back when I was in London, and if you go to, I went to an evangelical church once. Someone like took me there, and it was, oh my gosh, I'm Catholic, so it was. I don't know if you've ever been to like the tongues churches where they speak like tongues.
the Pentecostal churches,
Oh
yeah,
no, that's what it was. I said evangelical, I meant Pentecostal. And it was crazy. It was like a show. And it was the biggest like, oh my, it was so theatrical. And I look around and there's all these women, right? And the pastor is obviously pretty wealthy. Like they're really nice, so nothing against them, but they're clearly making a lot of money off of this operation. So it's like, what incentive would they have to stop making money off of single women?
yeah.
Like, how would
Well,
you what would ha like, how would you stop that? I just can't, you know what I mean, see that
it's
going.
very true. This is what's happened. Is we have a, a whole industry of people in the churches, in the state, um, in the legal profession that have a vested interest in all of this and in perpetuating it. And that's sad. I mean, really, what happened, the reason that the lawyers and the judges and the psychotherapists and all these people make so much money is because they've filled the vacuum that was left by the churches. At one time, the churches would have sorted out family crises, family
Oh,
disputes. The churches would have done, and it wouldn't be the pastor's main job. So he wouldn't make any money at it. He wouldn't have any financial incentive. He would have an incentive to um, sort the matter out as quickly as possible, so he could go back to preaching and saving souls. So his incentive would be to knock their heads together, make them get along, go into church, make sure that the judges and the lawyers behaved, and you'd have minimal state interest because the churches would fill that vacuum, and no need for psychotherapists because the churches would fill the role of the psychotherapy, which is the churches were the original psychotherapists. So it's the abdication of the churches. They've left this vacuum, and that's been filled up by these special interest lawyers, judges, psychotherapists, guardians ad litem, you name it. And that's why this system is entrenched, and people are making such. And as you say, even some churchmen are making money on it now and have a financial interest in perpetuating it, which
some
I hadn't
a
hadn't really
lot.
thought about before.
Oh, a
But yeah,
lot. It's all of like, I would say that it's a little bit slower in Catholic and, what's the other one? Orthodox
yeah.
circles. I would say that's like the last churches semi-standing, and even some of them you go into, and I mean, it's funny, I asked my dad because my dad's, he's very, like, he doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, like, he's very, like, lives a very clean, like, lifestyle, but he's not that religious, and I asked him why once, and he said he was sick of being lectured by gay men. Like the priests. And so, and it was funny because my dad doesn't know any of this stuff, but even he like felt it and just naturally was like, nah, not for me. And but if you go into Protestant churches, it's like all women. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, it's like 80% women, 90% women.
Yeah, I'm a Church of England basically, which has kind of Catholic side and Protestant side to it. But yeah, I found that in the Episcopal Church in America, it was all run by women, feminists, and I lived in the state of Virginia, which had a very conservative Anglican establishment, and they broke away from the dominant Episcopal establishment, and they created a conservative. Um, they called it the Anglican Church in
Mhm.
America, and they went back to they refused to accept same sex marriage, and they wanted literal interpretation of Scripture, and in all respects they wanted to be traditional Orthodox Protestant Christians, but they too refused to take on the divorce situation. They refused, and they too. It was only a matter of months before they started. I started listening to female preachers getting up talking about the sin of domestic violence, and so, um, so this is my theory is that if you don't deal with the divorce issue, it deals with you. You either
Yeah.
defeat it or it will defeat us.
So you said that we have all been feminized, as in men. What did you mean by that?
Ooh, that's a big one. I'm only really starting to understand that myself now. I mostly deal with the legal and political matters. That's my area of specialty. But I do feel that. I mean, I look back on my own youth and my own life. I never was a I never accepted in when I was young manly virtues and so forth. I kind of laughed at that and poo-pooed it. And it's only taken me. I think a lot of men are like this. When I went through when my eyes were opened about the divorce machinery and the injustices, I began to re-question everything about my upbringing, about my beliefs. I was liberal left. I was a leftist. I was a socialist.
Really, you were a
I was right.
leftist.
I was. I
When
was
did
in
you
my youth. I was
switch? How long?
I switched basically when I found out about how the divorce system worked. I
Okay.
realized that everything I'd been
Okay.
brought up to believe in a liberal left household was wrong, was false. Had grown up in Washington, in and around Washington, D.C. My parents were federal employees. All my friends' parents
Oh,
were federal employees. We accepted the narrative of the liberal left, and I just grew up with this without questioning it. And when I realized what happened, when I saw the divorce system, how it operated, I saw the way my liberal friends, my parents' friends, responded to it. I saw the way other government employees, I realized my parents were not typical government employees, and that the federal, so much of the federal bureaucracy was geared to this chicanery. And I just questioned everything. And I think a lot of men this happens to. They just they're radicalized by this. I think you can see it in black men today. Young black men have been radicalized in the Trump election. A lot of them started voting for Trump, deserting the Democratic Party. They've come to realize, as I wrote in several recent pieces, that the whole welfare machinery, the whole Great Society programs, and the war on poverty, none of this benefited black men in any way or black children. The only people it benefited was black single mothers.
mm,
They were the ones that benefited from the war on poverty and the welfare system and all this. Um, it's done nothing but destroy the black male. And from there, it's been destroying the white male, the middle class male as well. I maintain that the black male, I say this a lot in my newest book, the black male is the canary in the mine shaft. And that's why he's deserting the Democratic Party and the liberal left. And very similar to my experience as well. Even though I was, middle class and affluent,
mhm.
but I've grown up I grew up in inner city. Part of it, my childhood in inner city Washington. So I saw the way the devastation of welfare on the black community,
Mhm.
and I could recognize it spreading to the white community.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing where some trends seem to hit the Black community first and then move into like, now it seems like it's in middle class, maybe white America, and then the upper class is last. Would you agree with that? Because that's just based on my observations.
I think so. Yes, that this often happens that the poor are most devastated. But this is true of a lot of things. When you think about it, think of all the vices that we all have in the middle class, and we can pretend that they don't hurt anybody. Social drinking, recreational drug use, casual sex. All these things we can do these things in the middle class, and we think, oh, what harm is it? It doesn't hurt anybody.
Mhm.
But then they spread to the poor, uneducated communities, and they're devastating. Alcoholism destroys the community, drug addiction, um, un, out of wedlock births destroy. So things which seem like harmless vices to the middle class and to the affluent, they they um, they can devastate the poor, and sometimes that devastation spreads from the poor back again to the middle class, and I think that's part of what's happening here. The other thing too is I would add would be left wing political ideology too. Again, we can indulge in fashionable socialism and leftism in the middle class, and gin and tonic socialism, but when socialism takes root in poor countries, in the global south, or in the the inner cities of America, then the result is it's just economic devastation.
You know what's interesting? I have a friend who's an art dealer, so his whole job is to like really, really wealthy clients he sells art to. And he told me that if they're over a certain net worth, it's like almost guaranteed they're liberal. I can't remember the exact net worth, but he said there's like the first class of rich people, which are going to be conservative. But once you get over, it's like, and I don't know if it's maybe that they're so rich that they don't have to deal with like day to day problems. Like, I don't know. I don't know what it is.
I think that's true. I think that is it. Yeah, that we it's the real. I mean, hate to use Marxist terms, but it's the bourgeoisie, the liberal bourgeoisie, and that's yeah, it is affluent people, and we, I should say, we. I used to be one of them. We've imposed this on the poor, and it's coming back to haunt us. It's
Mm.
what we've done to the poor is coming back to haunt the rest of us, and that's what I think has happened in America in the last 5 years, as the liberal left basically staged this coup d'état, or tried to stage this coup d'état, and to take over America. And for all of its flaws, I can only pray that the Trump administration at least managed to slow this down and stop it from getting any worse.
Why is the media censoring anything that talks about this? And why are the governments interested in that?
That's a good question. Yeah, this really, the divorce system was really the first news blackout. This is another example, I think, of the way the divorce system, I think, has created the blueprint for what goes on, for example, in the last few years with Donald Trump and his allies. I mean, they've been subject to news blackouts, on so many things, and yet I tried to point this out to them. The original news blackout was this one against fathers and families in the divorce system. So again, the media, this I've been fighting this for years, trying to get anything. A few years ago, I got an op-ed in the Washington Post of all places, but it's like pulling teeth to try and get the media to cover anything. You mention this to a reporter or an editor, and this look of fear just comes over their face, and they refuse to deal with it. They change the subject. They find an excuse to walk away. The same is true of priests, by the way, and pastors. Sorry, touching the microphone again. And it is amazing. But I guess the simplest explanation for me is that, again, feminism is on the vanguard today of the left, and what the feminists do in one context, the divorce system, they will do throughout the rest of the left and the rest of society. So I think that um, I think the reason for the news blackouts is that again, the feminists have learned that men are an easy touch if they present themselves as damsels in distress.
Mhm. Let me just make sure there's no other ones. Well, I think that's all my questions for you today.
Okay, well, thank you very much. These have been very intelligent questions, I have to say,
Yeah,
and
thank you very much for coming on. We'll definitely have you back when there's like what do you call it? Sometimes we have commentators for different news stories. So for family court ones, would you want to come back and comment on them?
oh, yeah, I'd be glad to. Actually, that was kind of odd. I only got it. I got an op-ed in the Washington Post because of Jesse Jackson. You remember the old civil rights leader, and he was caught up in a child support issue. So the Washington, because that gave me the news hook. And so the Washington Post managed to, to listen to me for 30 seconds, long enough to get an article in. So yeah, news hooks like that are very helpful. So no, I'd be glad to come on and talk at any time about it, because I don't think this is going away anytime soon. But I think we have a chance here with the Trump administration to look at this. We'll hope HHS is the key governmental body now, Justice Department too, but HHS especially. Robert Kennedy, I think he's more concerned with health than with family issues. So I'm not sure he's well informed about this, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of appointments he makes in the areas of governmental agencies like the Administration for Children and Families and the Office of Child Support Enforcement. So there's a possibility that if his eyes could be opened, we might get some change in the Trump administration.
I had Terrence. Do you know who Terrence Popp is?
No.
Yeah, if you're not super in the YouTube trenches, you might not know. But he's a really he's been working with helping prevent suicide in men for like 20 years. So
I saw him interviewed. You interviewed him a few days ago.
Yeah, a few days ago, and he mentioned that one solution could be making public the names of people, of judges that are unfair, and and then giving the complaints, like getting all of the complaints of people on certain judges and giving it to whoever's running against them.
That kind of thing, I've seen a lot of efforts like that over the years. They never seem to come to anything. I don't want to say they can't. That's a good plan in conjunction with others. The public, it's hard to get the public interested in local issues, even where judges are elected. Most people don't take much interest in the election of judges. It doesn't hurt. It's not a bad thing to do if you can mobilize people. But I think I would like to see a more kind of cutting the Gordian knot by dealing with the constitutional issues from the top down. Again, I also see every father that runs afoul of the family courts talks about a federal class action suit. I've seen a dime a dozen. They never go anywhere either. So I hate to be discouraging about this, but I would love to see more pressure put on the Trump administration and on the on politicians like DeSantis and Josh Hawley, who claim to be concerned about the family, but don't really do very much that's of substance. But all of these things together, I think they complement one another. So it's not a bad thing.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can the people find you?
My books and recent articles, they can find them on my website, StephenBaskerville.com. That's Stephen with a PH. And there's a link there to my Substack. My most recent articles since the book was published in June, I've been trying to update it with articles on Substack and in published journals. So between my website and my Substack, they can get my most important writings and interviews.
Okay, great. Well, guys, go buy his books. Go follow him on there. And thank you very much for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for addressing these issues. It's extremely important.
Thank you. Okay, guys. So if you guys liked doing the one-on-ones, let me know in the comments. This might be a weekly Friday thing that we do as a show. So let me know in the comments, guys. Please like the video on your way out and subscribe to the channel. And please go to theaudacitynetwork.com. I'm getting a lot of push to bring on, I'm not going to say his name, but certain controversial people. And look, we can do that if we get a certain level of members. Okay, you have to go to theaudacitynetwork.com and get our monthly or yearly memberships. If we get like 4 yearly memberships a day, 5 in a couple of months, I can bring on whoever you want. So just hit theaudacitynetwork.com, and then you also get first access to our documentaries, and I read your comments during the show. This show we had Yakov. I mean, you guys can make your usernames whatever you want. I cannot promise I'll pronounce it right. Rob Fields. Santiago is always in the chat. What a guy. Tony, Brian, Yakov again. A lot of, motion going on there. Okay, guys, please like the video on your way out and subscribe. And yeah, go to theaudacitynetwork.com. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.